very thorough methodology for it, and I do think that it's information that trustees should be aware of that could inform their decision. So it's a 10-minute presentation, and looking to you as the chair whether or not you want to hear it.
Okay.
So we'll do this presentation first, and then the 10-minute presentation by community engagement. Turn it over to Sterling and Jocelyn.
Aloha mai kākou.
Aloha, aloha trustees.
Yeah, Jocelyn's going to start.
So mahalo nui for allowing us this opportunity to provide some information on this really important decision for the trustees. I wanted to just preface the presentation by saying that we were really cognizant of a desire for us to be balanced. So the goal here is to make everybody not super happy, because we want to make sure we take everybody's mana'o into consideration. So I wanted to mahalo everybody and mahalo our community for coming out. So we're just going to get started right away. I just wanted to kind of frame what we're going to be talking about this morning. So first, we're going to talk about a little bit about the project itself and how it's related to our strategic plan. We're going to talk about the significance of these lands as being ceded and public land trust lands and what that means for OHA. I'm going to briefly describe, which cannot be done briefly, but try the movement that we see by our lahui, which didn't just start at the beginning of this month. It's been going on for decades. And then Sterling is going to go over the ramifications. We try to understand the potential ramifications of the different options before you. So here we go. So the TMT project, the 30-meter telescope project, was driven and initiated by the U.S. Astronomy Program, a community basically. It was described as being critical that they were able to get an infrared 30-meter telescope to continue the United States' premier leadership in astronomy in the world. And so the idea is that if built, the TMT project will be the most advanced, powerful ground observatory in the history of science. I think there's one coming up right behind it, which puts this statement into question, but this is their goal. The project's main components will be a 184-foot dome, so that's about 20-story, like a 20-story building, 18,000 square foot supportive building, parking, a visitor platform. Those will be eventually taken down at the end of the sublease. The permanent parts of the project are going to include over half-a-mile access way, personnel facilities at Halepohaku, and a 20 to 35,000 square foot building at UH Hilo as their headquarters. So if you look on the picture on the left, you can see that all the way at the bottom left-hand corner is where they're expecting the location to be. It's not where the other telescopes are. It's in the northern plateau, which is currently not developed. And then the right is just a picture of what the telescope's gonna look like. So we really wanted to try to organize our discussion about the potential concerns and positive things that would come out of the project in a way that was meaningful for us, which is why, of course, we are looking at our strategic plan, which this board has articulated will be our priorities moving forward. It touches on all of our strategic priorities, and we'll focus primarily on 4 of them. The way we were able to summarize this information, which is also in your memo, was through looking at every single document related to the project before it got permits or approvals, including submittals, testimonies, et cetera, court cases, challenging permits, et cetera. So we'll get started with Ho'okahua Waiwai, which is economic, which implies economic development, and Ho'ona'oa, which is education, 2 of our strategic priorities. It's said that the astronomy sector in Hawaii is actually a really decent size industry. In 2012, they spent over $88 million, which resulted in over $167 million in a ripple effect of in-state spending. So, for example, when they pay their astronomer, that person pays for their car, pays rent, buys groceries, et cetera. That's how you come up with the second number. Well, a really simplified way of how you come up with the second number. It's said that the TMT project will continue either to continue this rate or increase it. It's hard to evaluate because there will be telescopes coming down, but it's thought that it would create both direct and indirect impacts, economic contributions to the state. According to the chancellor, there's going to be over 300 temporary jobs and over 140 permanent jobs. It'll elevate the university, which could bring in research dollars and attract students. There will be at least $1 million in scholarships and awards for STEM research and/or, trying to get people to be, hireable in STEM fields. I guess increase the amount of Hawaii people hireable in STEM fields. A quarter of that is currently going to be distributed through Pauahi Foundation, which is for Native Hawaiians specifically. They're also have already started and will continue to develop a workforce pipeline program, which means that UH Hilo students and Hawaii Island students will have opportunities to participate in programs that, some of which are tailored specifically for jobs at TMT. The indirect impacts, positive impacts, will be spending by the OMKM, viewing time, which will help to continue to elevate the UH astronomy program, substantial research and grants and contracts to the university, and visitor spending, which is a double-edged sword, obviously, because the more visitors that go to the mountain, the more potential impacts, the more cost for management, which leads us really nicely into our next strategic priority, which is Aina. So there's no question that this project is going to have impacts to natural, biological, and water resources. TMT admits as such in its EIS. I think where the dispute comes in is the severity of that impact and the threshold for when it's too much. So in the EIS itself, they admit that this project will further the already existing substantial and adverse impacts to the geological, cultural, archaeological, and historical resources. So it admits that. However, they say that because there is already such substantial and adverse impacts to these resources, that their contribution is limited. We purposefully are not editorializing, so we're not evaluating these statements. I think you could look at it from either perspective. Also, the site for TMT does not contain any threatened or endangered species. The two species of concern are a fern. So kalamai, I actually don't know the Hawaiian name for the fern, and a vacuum bug. The TMT admits that there will be some impacts. They're saying that it will not be substantial. This site has not an ideal, it has been characterized as not ideal for these two species, and part of the mitigation is to monitor the bug throughout the construction and beyond. Other concerns, and as always, our beneficiaries are always concerned about the impacts to our water resources, as is OHA. So there have been concerns raised about impacts to the aquifer, Lake Waiau, runoff spills. TMT's response has been, yes, there's going to be runoff, but it will not be significant. They've said instead of using mercury, they're going to use, they still have to use hazardous materials, but they're not going to use mercury. They've been daily inspections set up. They're using zero discharge wastewater. And BLNR has said the likelihood of a spill is very, very minimal. The EIS relies upon information put together by experts, hydrology experts, not necessarily ones they've hired. So it's not clear if they hired a hydrology expert for this project itself or relied upon observations and studies that had been done previously. And the BLNR, those determinations have been that there will not be significant impact. We don't know of any studies indicating otherwise. But I think what's clear for our beneficiaries is this is happening in the context of what has been described as really bad management of the mountain itself. And so these concerns that have been raised are not just about the TMT site itself, but rather about the management of the entire mountain. There have been audits from the late 90s which have supported the statements by our beneficiaries, as well as OHA, because we've raised concerns in the past. In 2014, there was a follow-up to the audit, and that audit report suggests that there have been substantial improvements, but that they cannot do an adequate job without the administrative rules, which they're still in the process of doing. And also, of course, this is happening in the Conservation District, which should be the least developed of all of our lands. And so when you're talking about 14 facilities and its supporting facilities, and then now this project, which actually in terms of the square footage leased is more than a third of all the other projects, if you combine them all, it's also about the scale. And so, of course, we cannot talk about Aina without talking about culture. There's no question that Mauna Kea is one of the most sacred places in Hawaii, if not the world. It is our connection to Mauna Kea and serves as an altar for some beneficiaries. Throughout time, though, there has been a small number of beneficiaries that have talked about the consistency of use of this place for navigation and use by priests and ali'i, et cetera. TMT, or the University of Hawaii's response mitigation, has been to move the location. So it was originally, they were originally looking at the summit. The location now purportedly has less cultural sites than the summit. And I've had conversations with Hawaiians that participated throughout the process that agreed with that. I've also had conversations with Hawaiians that disagree with that. They're also going to be doing some days just for cultural observation. They're already training in place for people that work on the mountain and do the tours. They're going to continue to make sure that access is open. During construction, there will be cultural and archaeological monitors. And they say that a part of the design was to mitigate issues for viewing, landscape viewing, and et cetera. So, sorry if I didn't say that right. But for the critics, the bottom line really is this is a massive project on what they consider to be a sacred mountain. And there's no question that there's going to be both short-term and long-term disturbances. There are going to be cars going up and down throughout construction and after. TMT has admitted that specific practices will be affected. And for some, there's just like a this is enough sentiment, which is why I think a large part of why we're here. And it's also about self-determination. It's about control over our resources that we feel are ours. And for many, it certainly is. And for OHA, I think we would suggest the same. So we've consistently been staunch advocates for protecting the ceded lands corpus, which, as the trustees know, are lands comprised of kingdom, government, and crown lands that were stolen after the overthrow and eventually ceded to the United States, and now the state holds them in trust. And OHA has spent millions of dollars and allocated substantial resources to making sure that the corpus is not diminished. We oppose most sales, which now has created a process that it's not as easy to sell these lands anymore. And we also have, over time, developed an informal policy on commenting on long-term leases that may bind the hands of the lahui moving forward. And so this is really good context for this conversation, because the TMT sublease, while it's only set to be in place until 2033, is anticipated to be extended until 2079. They're investing $1.3 billion. Of course, they are thinking it's going to be extended past 2033. And this all hinges on a master lease between the Board of Land and Natural Resources and the University of Hawaii, which also currently expires in 2033. If they do get an extension into 2079, we're talking about 110 years of management by an organization that has not necessarily benefited Hawaiians and has not done the greatest job in management. So it's really important that, and we have, our trustees have scrutinized this in the past. When you put 110 years into context, I was driving to work today thinking about, well, it's just a number, like how do I make that meaningful? So if you think about where we were 122 years ago, we were a kingdom 122 years ago. So it kind of just puts things into context for us about how much societal, political, and cultural change can happen in that time. And so it's really important for us to ask, are there alternative and better ways to use ceded lands generally before we bind them for this period of time? And who knows what we'll be in 110 years from now? OHA is also very concerned because these lands are public land trust lands. And with regards to this sublease in particular, our two particular concerns are whether or not there's sufficient benefit flowing to Native Hawaiians who are an enumerated beneficiary of the public land trust, and as well as, is the rent sufficient for adequate management? So the university, as well as the BLNR, as state agencies, have fiduciary obligations to use reasonable skill and care to make these trust lands productive. I think there's little question that they failed to do that on all of the other telescopes because they've not charged any rent for them. And the question, how Hawaiians have benefited is not that difficult a question. In this instance, they have charged rent. They are charging rent. It'll be the first observatory on the mountain to charge rent. It'll be over $1 million a year once the 11th year comes around and they're done developing. The way that they said that they calculated that was through the square footage of the lease. So they looked at all the telescopes leases and divided it, and the pro rata share is $870,000. And they also, then of course they added that amount, they added a portion to account for Native Hawaiians benefits, which primarily come through OHA. And that was $216,000. Throughout that time, we've really, when they were doing the sublease, questioned whether or not, and still continue to question whether or not that's sufficient. The value of the telescope time, which will be over $100,000 a night, was not taken into consideration. They didn't do an independent audit. They didn't suggest that there should be reopenings and reconsiderations, et cetera. And another one of their fiduciary obligations as trustee is to deal impartially when there are multiple beneficiaries. The substantial amount of benefits of the telescopes up on the mountain have been to a very small subset of Hawaii's people. UH gets a substantial benefit. In 2012, they got over 22 million of their 32 million budget in federal grants and other contracts. That's a lot of money. And it also trickles down to, obviously, the folks that are a part of that astronomy program. They also get 7.5% of the viewing time. In this case, the only direct benefit going to Native Hawaiians, other than the OHA contribution, is $250,000 scholarships and grants. Whether or not that's sufficient. That said, it's more than any of the other telescopes are paying. In the spirit of being balanced, we have to recognize that. I wanted to talk about why we're here today. Earlier, what we're calling the protection on the mountain. OHA was involved in litigation in the early 2000s over the plans to do the Keck telescope. And as TMT's project permits moved forward, the opposition grew slowly. We saw this come to a head just at the beginning of this month. We're still in April, I just realized this morning. 31 people, primarily Native Hawaiians, were arrested after trying to block construction from taking things up to the mountain to start construction. Since then, there's just been an explosion of attention paid to this movement. It can't be understated, both through social media and mainstream media, this has been a topic every day since the arrest happened. And they've gained massive support, both locally, nationally, and internationally. They've raised probably over $75,000. I don't have the exact figures, but in 3 weeks. So it's a real movement, and that's why we're here. And so that's why we're gonna, I just wanted to put this up on the board to remind the trustees of why we're here and what we're gonna do today. So in July of '09, our board took a position to support the siting of Mauna Kea. We subsequently tried to urge BLNR to protect traditional and customary practices and mitigate adverse impacts. And then our trustees have asked us to provide information for today's decision. So Sterling is going to go over what we described as ramifications of the different positions for the board. I like to describe them as opportunities or potential threats.
Aloha mai kako. So I'll be very brief. I think a lot of this is fairly commonsensical. And when we put this together, so Joss talked mainly about the TMT itself. What I'm going to do is present on basically the ramifications of each one of the decisions the board has as an option. And this is normally what we do, sort of the due diligence we provide to the board for usually like legislative positions and things like that. So it's very, we talk about everything basically. And so one of the difficult things with putting together the ramifications was assigning sort of the possibility for each one. And I think what's really good is what Kehau is going to present, because the survey, I think, can provide a little bit more of a sense of where everybody is on this issue. It's not necessarily scientific, but I think it's helpful and it supports sort of this analysis I'm providing. But basically, I think, obviously, whether the board opposes or supports, people are going to be unsatisfied. I don't think it's hard to really figure out which side they're going to all be on. If the board decides to support and continue its support, obviously the protectors, a large portion of our Native Hawaiian community, this movement is going to be unsatisfied with that decision. But of course, I think obviously the people that support the project are going to be satisfied with that position. If we oppose, this large vocal part of our community is going to be much happier. And if we oppose, the supporters are going to be unhappy, obviously. And I think what we're trying to describe in this, and I won't go through every slide because it's pretty commonsensical, is how that affects our other advocacy on other things beyond TMT. Obviously, sort of harnessing this movement and supporting them may help us in our other advocacy. Of course, opposing the TMT will have repercussions with decision makers and political leaders and affect our other advocacy efforts. The two I kind of want to discuss that aren't really sort of the obvious ones are something the Star Advertiser brought up in its editorial 2 weeks ago, and it's how OHA is viewed in terms of being, if we change our position, whether it's to rescind the position or to oppose, there's this idea that's going to be conveyed into the community that OHA is indecisive, is not reliable, and is not willing to take a hard stand one way. So we flip-flop a lot. The other thing is that, if we do change our position, either way, it shows a responsiveness. It shows that the board can, see what's happening in the community, political changes occurring, new information comes up, so we're responsive to the community. And the main one I really want to talk about is this rescind the support position, which I think, in talking to people, I think people are really confused about what this allows OHA to do. I think the oppose and the support are pretty clear, but the rescind, if the board rescinds its support for the position, what that results in is it's not just that OHA is going to stand on the sides and we have no position. We have a statutory mandate to advocate for the betterment of the conditions of Native Hawaiians. We have a strategic plan, and we have 30 years of history of advocating for our mission and for our beneficiaries. So if we rescind our position, what that essentially means is that we are still going to be advocating for our beneficiaries, making sure land use, management, cultural practices are protected, but also that the resources that should be coming to our beneficiaries from this project, whatever happens, comes to them in terms of educational resources or financial resources, anything like that. So rescinding the 2009 position doesn't mean we don't have a position. It just means that we are still going to be fulfilling our statutory mandate and doing
different board members.
Sure. But yeah, so we're still going to be advocating for our beneficiaries. And I just wanted to make that clear that, we still have a kuleana, a big kuleana, and a big role in if we do rescind. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kehao, because I think Kehao's presentation, what they did with the survey, gives you a better sense of, all of these have mays or likelies, but I think with the percentages of the actual survey results, you can get a better sense of what the likelihood of each one is. So thank you.
Aloha Chair, Trustees, aloha no kako apau. Mahalo, Trustees, for the opportunity to provide our survey results, the respondents' views on possible OHA stances regarding the planned TMT location on Mauna Kea. Kapo'ohana asked our Community Engagement Division to prepare and implement an online survey for a number of reasons. Prime among them was a desire to offer the board useful information for your consideration. We know that among the many factors that trustees consider in decision-making are the views of beneficiaries and others in the community. And we know that OHA's successes rely on OHA having the trust and confidence of our beneficiaries and the wider community. Their voices matter. And so we wanted to make sure to afford our beneficiaries and the larger community an opportunity to share their views on the focal questions that we have before us today, that you folks have the great kuleana to make decisions on today. The online survey has a number of benefits, and these are some of the other reasons why Kapo'ohana asked us to do this. The survey allows for those who would want to convey a message to the trustees to provide that message in a very efficient manner. Within 10 minutes, thousands of people's opinions are going to be presented to you. So it's both convenient for them and convenient for you as well. Not everybody's able to make it to the board and offer testimony. This is a sampling of people who care about this issue, who have formed their opinions about it based on whatever education that they have provided themselves. And we think that's a very good way to sample, for people to raise their hand and say, I have something to say, sit down at a computer, get their mobile phone, and participate. As opposed to maybe the other kind of survey that we might think of sometimes, where surveys can be, if we're trying to figure out some other kinds of questions, we might want to have a purely random survey. All kinds of people that kind of sample the general population. But that's not what we're trying to do here, because we think you folks probably don't really want to know what just random folks out there think. We're probably more interested in people who are closer to the issue, who have formed an opinion, and want to hear from them, who are people who are raising their hand and saying, we want to share some of our mana'o with you. So that's the reason for this online approach. It can be implemented very quickly. We had it up on a Monday, and in that short amount of time, got a large number of responses, which you'll see in a little bit. We're able to do it at a very nominal fee, and also are able to focus on the key questions at hand. And these are the stances under the board's consideration, so that you folks can see how our beneficiaries and the general public are viewing these stances. Are they aligned with what people view as OHA's mission? Are they not aligned with what people view as OHA's mission? So of course, those three stances are to, one, maintain the support for the TMT location on Mauna Kea, or two, to take a neutral, neither for nor against stance on the TMT location, or number three, to take a stance to oppose the TMT location on Mauna Kea. The survey also asked, what level of importance do you place on this issue? How much does this matter? Before we get into the results, just a few words on the integrity of the data. We know that online surveys afford people the opportunity, very passionate people, to clear their browser history, clear their cookies, and start all over again, and respond, and respond, and respond, and respond, which creates maybe a skewed result. So being well aware of that, our digital media team was able to scrub the data to eliminate all the multiple responses from any one IP address. So in the sampling, we have only one response per IP address. It's a very large sample as surveys go, especially one that was up for only 46 hours. 7,947 unique IP address responses, which also, given that large sample, minimizes another difficulty that could be pointed out, that someone with a laptop and an iPad and a cell phone could get 3 votes in, basically. So even if that were the case, we know that people on all sides of the issue have multiple devices, and we know that you would, with this sample size, you would need a whole lot of devices to skew the data in your favor. So probably that was a negligible effect. Let's get to the results.
I had a question.
The first question.
Wait. I want you guys to finish, and then I'll call on Trustee Ahuisa. Just finish.
So the first question, if OHA trustees were to reaffirm their stance supporting the location of the planned 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea, how would that affect your views regarding OHA's efforts to fulfill its mission to improve the conditions of Native Hawaiians? So if there were to be this stance, is this viewed as something that would have a negative impact on OHA's ability to fulfill its mission, or would it have a positive impact on OHA's ability to fulfill its mission? And what we see is that a majority of Native Hawaiians, 68%, see this stance as having a negative impact on OHA's mission. A minority of 22% of Native Hawaiians see this stance as having a positive impact on OHA's mission. If you look at the non-Hawaiian population, there's a 54% part of that group who see this stance as having a positive impact, and a 29% portion of the group as having a negative impact. And of course, you see that there are some folks who didn't identify their, they didn't answer that question on whether they're Kanaka Maoli or not, and so those are the red ones on the bottom. Again, that's probably a negligible influence in the overall trends that you see in the data. And then there are a few folks who didn't answer that question. Question 2, if OHA trustees were to rescind their position, their support for the location of the planned TMT on Mauna Kea, resulting in a neutral, neither for or against stance, how would that affect your views regarding OHA's efforts to fulfill its mission to improve the conditions of Native Hawaiians? This was a very interesting result because both a majority of Native Hawaiians at 57% and non-Native Hawaiians at 59% see this stance as having a negative impact on OHA's mission. Question 3, if OHA trustees were to take a stance to oppose the location of the planned TMT on Mauna Kea, how would that affect your views regarding OHA's efforts to fulfill its mission to improve the conditions of Native Hawaiians? Here we see a reverse of what you saw in number 1. Now a majority of Hawaiians at 67% see this stance as having a positive impact on OHA's mission. And a minority of 21% see this stance as having a negative impact on OHA's ability to fulfill its mission. Looking at the non-Native Hawaiian data, 58% of those see this stance as having a negative impact on OHA's mission, and 28% see this as having a positive impact on OHA's mission. Question 4 was the question aimed at trying to see how important is this to people. Now, how important would OHA's stance on the TMT Mauna Kea issue be in shaping your overall views of OHA's efforts to fulfill its mission to improve the conditions of Native Hawaiians? And what we see is that a majority of both Native Hawaiians, 76%, and non-Native Hawaiians, 58%, see this as a very important decision having a tremendous impact on OHA's overall ability to fulfill its mission. This is a defining moment, and we recognize that you as trustees have a huge kuleana on your shoulders, and we hope that this information might help you with your deliberations.
At this time, Chair, we open it up to the board for questions or feedback regarding both public policies analysis as well as the data that was just presented by Dr. Kehawaba.
Thank you, Kamana'o. Thank you, staff. First up, I'd like to call on Trustee Ahuisa.
The survey, with all due respect, Kehao, on writing this, I understand because I did a dissertation too. The way the second question was written, it confused a lot of people. And I'm on Facebook and I see all of these blogs. Oh, I don't understand. What are they trying to do? Confuse us. And I know the way you write it makes a really big difference on how you answer. Like when we do an amendment to the state constitution and how we write it for the voters. They get all mixed up and they end up voting, getting rid of the Board of Ed for one. Okay, I read this. So do you look at the numbers? Does it make sense? Number one, look at number one. Negative impact on OHA if we support. Okay, you see the 3,090. Go to number two. Negative impact on OHA if we resend it. High number, negative impact. They don't want us to resend it. It's the same as one. Okay, and then opposed. Large impact if we don't do any, to Kanaka Maoli and the non. So it was very confusing, and if I have a PhD and I'm confused, I can imagine other people trying to read this and vote.
I think you raised a really good point, Trustee. I just wanted to, if I could take a second before Kehao responds. I actually helped to draft the second question. I think regardless of how we drafted it, the idea of what it means to rescind our position is confusing to folks. Sterling and I went back and forth on what rescind means, and I think he did a really good job of capturing it. I don't think that people would be here asking us to oppose this project per se if we didn't support it in the first place, right? So to some extent, we're just kind of undoing what we've done and untying our hands.
No, it's okay. I said with all
So
due
I just
respect,
wanted to take
explain
responsibility for the confusing
With
question.
the community concerns. Sorry,
thank you.
Chair. Thank you.
Are you done?
Yes. Okay, how is the response?
Just a quick, kalamai for the difficulty in the wording. We realized it was a challenging question, and there are a number of reasons that, from staff perspective, there was a need for that wording to be that way. But I think that what number two is pointing out is very telling, and that's that regardless of where people sit on this issue, they would wish that a definitive decision either for or against this project is made by your board, and that's really the story there. They don't want to see a on-the-fence outcome, it seems.
Thank you, Dr. Abad. Trustee Akana.
Yeah, I just thought that we have in because there are so many people here that have come to testify, I want to begin the testimony so we can get to everyone. So I would hope that we could do that as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. It's been considered. Trustee Apo first, followed by Trustee Machado.
Just one quick question. How long is the poll open?
It was open for about 46 hours.
So it's closed?
It's closed now. If there's a desire to reopen it, we're very able to reopen it if that's the wish of the board.
I do understand, and I don't argue that you were looking for a response from a specific targeted group.
No, in fact, we were looking for a response from anyone who would wish to communicate something to the board.
But the very
It was-
nature of the instrument being used is OHA-centric. There are a lot of people who don't like OHA, so they don't even tune into the website, is what I'm saying, okay? So you have Hawaiians out there who don't like OHA, who don't even look at the website, so they don't really have a chance to weigh in if you're open for 3 days. I think it skews the poll, and that if you reopen it to give more time and a fair shot at everybody being able to weigh in, especially Hawaiians. Mostly Hawaiians are going to do it because the other guys don't care about us, right? So anyway, it's just a suggestion, that's all.
Just to maybe provide some background as well on how the survey got out in the world, while we did announce it on OHA venues, it was quickly then picked up by many other people throughout the community and then pushed out by others who were encouraging in their different interest groups. Social media really moved this out, and so most people found out about it, in fact, probably not from OHA, but from their friends, family, colleagues, through social media.
Thank you. Trustee
and
Machado,
the like.
did you have anything?
This question is to Jocelyn and Sterling. Based on your chronology, OHA took positions on 2 resolutions, right? One that was done in 2013 and 2009.
Actually, there's some confusion about the resolution. The first resolution about the citing passed through the BAE committee, and instead of supporting the resolution in the board table, you actually just supported the motion. Yeah, which is what I had up
So
earlier.
if we had to reverse our position and the recension,
Right.
we're looking at what specific resolution?
So we would looking at a motion. So if Capson can go to if everybody can go to the last slide of your PowerPoint presentation. We don't need a resolution.
2009.
We would be undoing the 2009 motion. And so the options that we prepared for the trustees are almost identical language to the 2009 motion. So you would be reaffirming, rescinding, or opposing, using almost the
Put
same
on the
language.
board.
Yeah.
Can we take that off the screen and put the motions, please?
Okay, this is the resolution from 2009, Chelo.
Yeah.
That was only approved by BAE.
Right, so what actually would the language be? Because,
Capson is going to put it up, and it's on your last slide, if trustees
Because
want to
if
look
I
at it.
recall correctly, having been at the chair
Oh,
at
okay.
that 2009 action, it was a separate, completely different
Absolutely.
action, motion that was made at the board table,
Yes.
very specific. That, I guess you're referring to them pulling up right now.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
trustee.
let me just add what happened, what was happening at the table that day, just to set it in context.
Yeah.
Because some of us were present, and I think it's important, and, the vote that was taken on 2009 is the vote that was taken. Okay, but setting the context for those who may or may not have had the opportunity to be present in 2009. The context being what you see was the final action on Mauna Kea. What was operating at that time was the issue related to the siting for two. Possibly the second siting was going to be Chile. And that was the tension, we call it the tension or the opportunity, or what do you want to call it, of those two issues. And so when the decision, the action was approved, it was, having been there, that was the focus. That was the main focus, that Mauna Kea would have that opportunity, it would be focused on Hawaii Island. Many things have changed since then, obviously. But that, just to set the context in which that 2009 motion was taken, I think is very critical and important. Thank you.
Thank you, trustees. Is there any more questions by trustees?
Clarification, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Trustee Akana, you're the last trustee right now.
Yeah, are we considering the vote at this point?
No,
No. I want to listen to beneficiary concerns first.
Yeah, okay, good. I have a question for council. If the motion is to rescind, I believe I was the only trustee who voted no. So would I be the one to not vote when the board votes to rescind? No, I would vote as a whole again. I see, okay.
Change your mind.
just one last point I wanted to.
Hang on.
Yeah, I think it was John
Trustee
and I. that-
Machado has one last point to make.
This is
Please
just
allow her
to clarify
make that
for our
point.
audience. In 2009, the trustees that weren't present at the time was Trustee Hulu Lindsay, Trustee Leahu Isa, Trustee Peter.
You were not present.
Yeah, they weren't present, meaning they weren't with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Trustee Peter Apo and Trustee Dana Huna. So there were 4 trustees that was not part of that decision-making. So part of the review now is for them to get firsthand information on what took place. So I thank you folks' patience for allowing us for the briefing and to provide for those 4 trustees that opportunity to track the chronology and to hear the discussions.
Thank you, Trustee Machado, for making that comment. That is true. Kamana'o.
Just final comment on behalf of administration. We've heard a lot in public policy testimony as well as the community engagement and from others And I just wanted to clarify because part of the organization's goals, one of them for not just this year, but the next several years is really focus on our vision and mission and how that's defined in terms of our different kuleana as advocate, asset resource manager, researcher, and community engagement. We're very familiar with the Chapter 10 language of improving the lives of Native Hawaiians, but our mission is very, very specific, trustees. So before we turn it over, is just a reminder that our mission is to malama Hawaii's people and environmental resources and OHA's assets toward ensuring the perpetuation of the culture. Mauna Kea is culture, the enhancement of lifestyle and the protection of entitlements of Native Hawaiians that's related to ceded lands, while enabling the building of a strong and healthy Hawaiian people and nation, recognized nationally and internationally. That's our closing statement for administration, and we'll turn it over to you, Chair.
Thank you
for
so much
discussion.
for reminding us about our responsibilities.
Thank you, Kapahano.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you
Judge.
need it. You need to hear it.
Thank you all. Okay, now we're going to move into community concerns and beneficiary comments. Because of the tall amount of beneficiary comments,